Well, what about the biggest trade that most of us do these days? Well, that is, of course, buying a home. What does a local estate agent think of what the Chancellor has announced, and what impact does he think it's going to have? Ian, lovely to see you. I'm joined here by Ian Preston, MD of Preston Baker Estate Agents. First of all, how has the housing market for you been affected by COVID-19?
Well, hugely. When we first had all of the lockdown, there was a huge amount of disruption to the business. We had a huge amount of sellers, probably about 600 sellers in total, who got put on hold. And then as things have been released slowly, things have been getting back to normal. But there's a huge amount of demand in the market and actually supply. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
So let's look at this, a couple of things more specifics. Stamp duty threshold, that's going up to £500,000. What difference will that make?
So to first-time buyers, it won't make a huge amount of difference. 90% of first-time buyers currently don't pay stamp duty. But it's actually going to make a really big difference to people who are looking to move up. And actually, one of the things we've noticed over the last 10 years is that people are moving less and less frequently. So this might just reduce the costs of moving by up to half. I mean, a seller selling at £500,000 will save £15,000 with these changes. So it's a really significant amount of money.
And houses that go for 500 grand or less, yeah. I mean, is that a big part of your market? What sort of proportion is it?
Yeah, so it will affect about 87% of the transactions that we do in the north.
Wow.
Will be covered by that. So currently 90% of first-time buyer transactions are exempt, so it's really that second-time mover. I mean, one bit of information which we're not totally clear on, but we think, is that the landlord purchases, they have a 3% surcharge, and that will not be affected. So hopefully it won't stimulate too many more investment purchases, but we'll wait and see.
So this is people buying a home as a buy-to-let property to rent it out?
Correct, or as a second home, yeah.
And what about the rental market? I mean, we've heard lots of stories of people who are renting who can't afford to pay their rent. It's been a really hard time for some people. How is the rental market at the moment?
So the rental market's strong. Again, because people aren't moving as much, so there are lots of people, Jane, who are nervous about engaging with other people, understandably, and those people just aren't actually moving, and that applies to tenants and it applies to sellers. So therefore, the people who do want to rent, who want that flexibility, some of them actually can't find a property. So yeah, our biggest problem as a business is actually having enough staff to be able to handle the inquiries, and we're creating 14 new jobs over the next 2 months just to meet the level of demand we've got today without any changes.
Wow, and you're hoping, obviously, that demand is going to go up.
Sure.
Another thing the Chancellor mentioned was this home improvement voucher.
Sure.
I mean, you said you that fewer people might move generally, yeah. But does that people doing home improvements, perhaps it's going to be good for tenants if landlords are going to improve their properties?
So the way that most people engage with energy efficiency is through the energy performance certificate, which you have to have whether you're renting a property out or whether or not you're purchasing a property. So it will improve EPC ratings, it will reduce people's monthly running costs. But I think the primary thing which the Chancellor is trying to achieve is to stimulate jobs. That's what this is all about. So if it creates green jobs, then that can only be a good thing.
What about March 2021? Because this stamp duty lifting to 500,000 is going to end then. We saw a great deal of fear about buying during the whole Brexit time. Do you think this is now going to prompt a big rush, but that it might crash to an end again next March?
So the only precedent we've got for this was that 3% stamp duty surcharge that I mentioned. So that was given with, I think, about 6 or 7 at the time. And what we saw was one of the biggest months for transactions. So what I would suggest will happen is there will be an initial surge, and you'll see transaction numbers spiking through October all the way through to March. And then, yes, we're going to be taking a holiday, no doubt, in April, and giving our staff a bit of a break.
And in terms of staff, I mean, it's a lot of people have been laid off during this time. Your industry, by the sounds of it, appears to be the one that are going to be taking people on in the future.
Yeah, we hope so. I mean, our business is heavily driven by transaction volumes. So if there's lots of transaction volumes, then we can afford to employ more staff and increase our headcounts. One of the biggest issues that we're facing at the moment is actually about mortgage availability. And that's not about the banks not having to lend, but it's about them having the staff to process the mortgages. So what's happening at the moment is we've had a number of lenders pull out 90% loan-to-value market. And basically that means if you've only got a 10% deposit, lenders have stopped lending at that level. and there's only 2 lenders currently who we can actually put mortgages to at that level. So it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens as to whether or not the banks are able to staff up, get more people to process the applications, and whether or not they have a good access to the supply of money.
Because, as you said, if this benefit of the increased stamp duty mainly affects those who are perhaps buying a second home, perhaps moving up, it's those first-time buyers that they want to keep at the bottom end of the market, don't they? And if they can't get a mortgage,
exactly,
the market will stagnate again, do you think?
That's it. It's hard to know. I think the biggest factor we've seen is the change from when I first started in the business 20 years ago. People used to move on average once every 7 years, and the current stats are in excess of once every 15 years. So if you think about that, that means that there's half the availability of property now than there would have been, say, 15 years ago. And the impact of that is that if I'm living in my home, transaction costs are high, such as stamp duty. It's actually better for me to improve the home I'm in rather than move. And that means that then there aren't new homes coming onto the market for first-time buyers. So the biggest thing the government can do is its supply side. It's about building new homes, building affordable homes, and making sure that they reduce the transaction costs so that people can afford to move quickly and easily. And that will make the biggest difference, we think.
Do you think you're ever going to see a time when you go back to those big peaks, the real housing boom times, 2007 times?
We'll wait and see. I mean, personally, I'm not a massive fan of double-digit house price rises. I don't think it's good for anyone. I mean, yes, it's eye-catching, yes, it brings people to the market, but it's not sustainable. So broadly, house prices need to rise in line with people's ability to pay, and that's average earnings growth. So what I like to see is I like to see 5%, 6%, but lots of people doing it. And then that's hopefully...
All making you.
Yes, exactly.
Good to talk to you.
Great
Thanks
to talk to
very
you,
much.